Today we're going to hear from a lot of inspirational speakers from all over different areas that deal with this issue. Each one will end with a Q&A following, so you can ask questions. Now, some people have already put questions in, but if you would like to add your questions, you can put it into the Q&A question on your screen today. We'll try and update those questions as right up to the minute. So keep putting in your questions as the day goes on. Today, of course, we're celebrating World Ecolabel Day. And so more than 50 countries around the world will celebrate this day in October. I'm not sure what the other countries are doing about it. What, you're not celebrating World Ecolabel Day? I'll have to get onto that. Consumers, companies and communities worldwide will celebrate by discovering the eco-labels available in their own countries. And I think that's a big part of the challenge we face, is not only setting up great eco-labels, but making people aware of them as well. Our speakers from our first panel today, the Collaborative Impact Panel, all share many things in common, yet they're all distinct in the type of eco-label program they run. To kick it off, I'd like to introduce Damian Paull from FSC, an experienced CEO with demonstrated history of working in the financial services industry. He's also skilled in the not-for-profit membership-based organisations. And Damian will be joining us online from Melbourne. Over to you, Damian.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Craig. Great to be here with you. Clearly, COVID's had an impact on me, looking at my photo that I supplied and looking at the image in my video now. It's been a hard year. Great, hopefully you can see that. Look, today's a bit of a soft launch of the Trusted Labels Group, which has been created in the spirit of collaboration. And I've got 7 minutes to give you a little bit of a speed date in relation to the Forest Stewardship Council and what we do, and how we think the Trusted Labels Group is going to help us with our messages of helping consumers and our stakeholders make better purchasing decisions around responsibly sourced products. Firstly, why FSC? Forest Stewardship Council, it has come together in the essence of collaboration. It started with this concern around deforestation and illegal logging back in the early 90s. And I was doing some research for this presentation today, and back in 2008, in the Australian context, wildfire and forestry were the two major contributors to deforestation in Australia. So this was a key issue, particularly as the whole environmental movement focused on climate change and a whole raft of other things in the 90s and into the 2000s. And with this concern, there were growing awareness of consumers wanting to know about the origin of their paper and wood products. The Earth Summit at Rio, group of people got together, collaborating, decided that this was such an issue that needed to be addressed and that governments weren't doing enough. They decided to create the Forest Stewardship Council, which is a not-for-profit organisation and very much member-based. It started in Germany. Their headquarters is in Germany, and we have offices all over the world. One of the things I found about FSC when we talk about collaboration being at the essence of what we do, is it is truly a membership-based organisation. It draws upon members across both the environmental, economic and social spheres, as well as it has a strong connection with Indigenous peoples, and it has a permanent Indigenous Peoples Committee that is set up and provides input into the standards that we develop around responsible forestry. It's governed by a board of directors in Germany and in Australia, which are drawn equally from those three chambers. And no one area can dominate the policy setting of the organisation, which means that collaboration and consensus is the only way that we can move things forward. The members get together once a year, once every 2 or 3 years at a General Assembly. Our next one is next year, where it's the members who decide on the key issues that affect how we operate. It's a bit like the United Nations, everyone's there voting, everyone's got positions, and it really is where the balancing of the social, ecological and economic interests have a voice in what FSC does in terms of developing its standards and implementing new aspects to the standards as things change. One of the things I like about FSC is it's based on a core set of 10 principles and 70 criteria. And what this means is that with this as the sort of the DNA of our standards are fairly consistent throughout the globe. So whilst there are variations for local economies and local situations, at the core of these 10 principles and 70 criteria that ensures that things that we value, like maintaining high conservation values, like protecting and respecting Indigenous people's rights, like ensuring safety and workers' rights as well, is embedded in the standards in every country. The other key aspect with our scheme, like the schemes of the Trusted Label Group, is we are independently audited. We don't play a role in the granting of certification. That's left to certificate certification bodies who independently assess whether our forest managers or our organisations within the chain of custody have met the requirements. And that creates a greater level of, I guess, independence from the process, and hopefully builds more credibility into the assessment of those standards, whether they've met the standards. And that all leads to, I guess, the important part for us, which is trust in our label and trust in what we do, because we're an integrity brand. We have 3 primary brands: FSC 100%, which comes from 100% sourced material from forests. We have FSC Mix, which is what we call responsibly sources. So there's, 70% of it has to come from FSC certified forests, and 30% can come from what we call controlled wood, which is a mitigated sort of way of assessing timber that can enter the system. And then we have a recycled label, which we're very proud of. One of the things talking to my team this morning, we're talking about the label and the prevalence of the label. And once you see our label on paper products and timber products, you will see it everywhere. And we've got some really strong brands in Woolworths and Aldi, Officeworks, Bunnings, actively promoting the brand and stocking FSC certified products. So now that you've seen the label, you will continue to see it from now on. You can't unsee it, which is great. This is a little bit about where we're situated and the density of the timber, or the size of the timber forests that we certify. Gives you an idea how broadly the FSC system is supported, which is fantastic for our own industry in Australia, because it means that FSC timber certified here is accepted in places all over the world, and it does feature in both imports and exports. Here's our numbers, just briefly. Over 213 million hectares certified worldwide, with a target of 300 million over the next 5 years. 44,000 chain of custody certificates, just over 1,700 what we call forest management chain of custody certificates to the forest managers, and 1,200 promotional license holders. And that's the end of the retail supply chain that are actively promoting our brand and enabling consumers to make some choices about buying responsibly sourced product. The benefits of FSC, and people say, why FSC? And we've talked about the independence and the way we're structured, but here are some of the things we're really proud of. We protect, or the standard protects, high conservation value forests. That's a must in FSC. Our waterways are protected as a requirement of the standard. Wildlife, habitat and species are protected and have to be managed. And the rights of Indigenous peoples, local communities and workers are respected as a requirement of the standards. And if these issues are not managed effectively and they don't meet the standards, people won't retain the certification. It just brings me to the Trusted Labels Group. FSC, its whole being is around collaboration and trying to create impact through collaboration. And when we had the chance to look at the Trusted Labels Group, we thought it was a great opportunity to demonstrate collaboration and work collectively together to innovate and support third-party, independently audited certification labels. We're proud of our labels, and consumers are going to be confronted with more choice around what does a label mean to them when they're purchasing. And I think the challenge for us is to make sure that our sustainable standards continue to address many of the world's biggest environmental and social challenges and ensure that they have real impact. And I think the Trusted Labels Group will help us achieve that for Australia and New Zealand. And I'll leave it there and wait for questions at the end of the session.
Thank you very much, Damian. Our next speaker is also joining us live from Melbourne, Molly Harris Olson from Fairtrade. She's the CEO of Fairtrade. She leads a dynamic team strengthening fair trade supply chains, growing revenue and bolstering environmental and economic sustainability practices throughout the Asia-Pacific region. Molly has delivered the opening plenary of the World Economic Forum 2000 meeting in Davos. She chaired Swedish King Carl Gustaf's Business Leadership and the Environment Symposium in 1996 and was named one of Australia's Financial Review's 100 Women of Influence in 2014, as well as serving as the Executive Director on President Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development at the White House from 1992 to 1996. A wealth of experience. So please welcome to our chat now, Molly Harris Olson from Fairtrade.
Hello, hello. Thanks, Craig. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk to you mostly about fair trade in my 7 minutes, but I really appreciated your comments in the beginning about the circular economy, and I just wanted to just point out that we have been talking about this for a very long time. In 1975, Herman Daly wrote his masterpiece, The Steady State Economics. Marilyn Waring here in New Zealand was coming up with similar ideas. Back in the very early 90s, I actually gave a speech for the second Global International Symposium for Ecological Economists. And I talked about the Irish elk economy, which, if you don't know what the Irish elk is, it's an endangered species because its horns grew so large that it actually died because it couldn't lift its head up. And I compared in this particular speech the US economy to the extinction of the Irish elk, and it's becoming more and more and more a reality these days. But it's so interesting to see how these issues have kind of been circulating in the world. I mean, Ian Kiernan and Kim McKay started Clean Up Australia, Clean Up the World, gosh, I don't know, that late 80s maybe, and I was involved on their board in the late 90s. We still have 14 million tons of plastic now in the oceans. So I guess what flagged in my mind is two things. One is that, the circular economy is great that people now sort of are thinking about it and talking about it. And we're really trying to define it, but actually we've known what to do here for a very long time. We've actually understood how these things are connected. And in fact, when I was at the President's Council, at the very end of my tenure there, we stumbled across this great set of principles called the Natural Step, which really looked at the biospherical limits to the planet and what we had to do to ensure that the living system would be able to continue if we wanted to be able to continue ourselves. And I encourage anybody to have a look at those principles because they're quite profound. And what they really do tell us is that there are some things that can be recycled, and recycling's great. We heard a little bit about some great recycling programs coming out of the budget. Aluminum, glass, there's many things. Plastic, actually, we are just going to have to find a way to not use it because we've got not only 14 million tons of it in the ocean right now, but even polyester clothing is ultimately, plastic. It actually lasts, the same, it basically ends up just like plastic. And there's $400 billion worth of clothes in the US alone, most of which are only worn once, that basically get shoved into landfill. And actually your pile of clothes, Craig, was something that has just stuck with everybody. It's even greater, the problem is even greater in the US. So I want to kind of, frame the fact that this is a really important conversation we're having here today because we actually do know what to do. I mean, the second example I'll use on the plastics and how not to use them, Ray Anderson, who was one of the just amazing CEOs at Interface who decided he was going to try to create a sustainable company, realized the epiphany for him was when he realized that the carpets he was making would last for 8 years on your floor in your office and 20,000 years in a landfill. And so he went about, in his case, he was trying to recycle those carpets so that he could relay them. And they were polyester fundamentally. But I do think that as we're talking about this, we need to do two things. We need to realize that actually the solutions to these problems have actually been with us for a very long time. So this is a question of how we implement these things. And that it is absolutely true that we have to collaborate to do this. No individual group, company, government can do this on their own. We all actually do have to figure out a way to do it together. And in my journey, which started with an undergraduate explosion of 3 Mile Island, and I added an economics degree to what was an evolutionary biology degree because of the economic implications of everything I was doing. This challenge has posed all kinds of conflicts. And I landed I'll tell you the short story, on the board of Fairtrade International. I was brought on there to chair the board. But when I got on that board, I realized, oh my God, this is actually a systemic solution to a systemic problem, which is the way commerce has these throughputs, the way it assumes indefinite and unlimited growth. And so I guess in my talk today, what I want to briefly say about fair trade is that it is the most phenomenal solution to a systemic problem, which is that of commerce and trade, which drives a lot of the unsustainability on the planet today. And when I became so impassioned by it, I actually, they were looking for an executive, and I was living here in Australia already. So I've actually been running the Australian office and working on the Asia office for the last 6 years. So without further ado, I will just I started to say fair trade after a long journey for me. I ran campaigns on the Rainbow Warrior. I worked at the White House. I did a lot of the World Economic Forum. In 2000, I gave the opening address where I said, they asked me what were the key issues for the next millennium, and I said endocrine disruptors, which is basically plastics, climate change, and water, were going to be the three things that humanity was going to have to sort out if we were going to be thriving. So fair trade, when I landed there, has this amazing capability. That's a great quote from Jacinda Ardern, but I'll let you fly past that. It actually has the structural underpinnings, is the way I would describe it, for genuine transformation in the world. And why do we need it? Well, I don't have to explain that to you guys, because we know that the world is getting increasingly unequal. I mean, it's actually now true that 26 individuals have as much wealth as 3.8 billion of the rest of the people on the planet, which is just mind-snapping, because we've always had an equality problem. That is just blown right out. And the impact of COVID is making that problem even more severe, because that the countries and the people who don't have safety nets and don't have JobKeeper are the ones that are going to be hit the hardest by this. So we have a challenge with a number of humanitarian issues. We have a challenge with ecology, which, your programs, Greg, are just fantastic and inspire lots of people. We need a new David Attenborough, so you just go for it, Guy. Are you guys still able to hear me out there? This tech is very exciting.
I hear you. I can't see the normal screen, so I can't tell you what others are seeing.
You can't see what others are seeing.
I can't see the normal screen.
We're seeing you perfectly. It's all good.
Okay, good.
We are wrapped. We're listening.
It's all good.
All right. So when I talk about systems thinking, which is what the natural step really in the sustainability space framed unbelievably well, fair trade had it all. So you look at fair trade and it has the entire supply chain from producer, where the most marginal and vulnerable people are, through traders, through manufacturers, and to consumers. And, the whole structure is set up to have markets that are driving the sales and understanding and awareness of what it is, what is the difference in the world? How are you alleviating poverty and creating a more sustainable world through what you purchase? And it matters a lot, I can tell you. And then we have producer networks. We have producer networks in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And the Fairtrade International Board is what's up here. They set the standards and the policy. That's what I was the chair of for a number of years. And flow certification, we had to create 33 years ago or something, because in those days, there was nobody who could certify against our standards. And so what you have in fair trade is this incredibly strong structure. And the other thing that is important in how it's designed is it has, when I say the structural underpinnings, the way it works is it has a set of standards across people, planet, and prosperity. They are about everything you can imagine. I don't have to go through the detail of that. Those are measurable. And everybody in that supply chain has to adhere to these. And they include things like governance for how the 200 million in premium monies are spent, for example. And that structure that has the standards is all measurable. There are consequences when somebody breaches the structure. You can identify a breach, and then there's a consequence to that breach. And we can actually kick anyone out of the system, whether it's a producer group, a trader, or a company. We can actually remove them from the system if they are failing to adhere to the standards. And that has, over many years, the more than 30 years that Fairtrade's been around, created what is the most recognized and trusted ethical label in the world. And it is trusted because what we do do is really hard. What we do is the detail around how those supply chains are working and what the transparency is. And the last thing I'll talk about is just how this connects with important modern issues like modern slavery. So I mentioned the structures. In addition to the standards, there's a minimum price, and that minimum price protects the farmers from the constantly up and down movements of commodity markets. And coffee, for instance, has been below the cost of production for many years. It's what creates grinding poverty for these very marginalized farmers in the world. And coffee, you'd be interested to know, is the second largest traded commodity next to oil. So there's the standards, there's the minimum price, and then for development, to enable farmers to have access to resources to create their own path to development, there is a premium. And that's now over $200 million every year that goes pumping into 1.8 million farmers and workers around the world in 75 countries. Products are actually sold in 125 countries. The minimum price, the standards, and then that premium is what we call the development dividend. And that's what enables the producers to have access to resources. They can build their own water, schools, hospitals, whatever it is that they choose to do. And what Fairtrade audits in that case, the standards are really clear on the governance around that. So the community groups, the cooperatives get to choose whatever they want to do with that resource, but they have to have a public meeting. The decisions have to include everybody. Women have to be able to vote. You know, sometimes they don't in a lot of countries, you'd be amazed. And what we audit is the governance arrangements around how the decisions were made and that they did what they said they were going to do with that $200 million. And this is spread across, of course, these millions of farmers. So it's an incredible system that has this robust structure and transparency within it. And you can identify when somebody's playing by the rules and when they're not. And when they're not, there's a way of getting them out. I also sit on the Global Reporting Initiative board. And for instance, Global Reporting Initiative has great standards, but there's no consequence if you breach them. You can use those standards in any way you want, and that's useful. But at the end of the day, if you're really trying to transform a structure in the global economy, for example, like trade, you want to be able to have a way to actually tell the difference between who's playing by the rules and who isn't. The last thing I will say about Fairtrade, which I had the privilege when I was the chair of the board to ensure happened, was we'd been discussing for about 5 years when I took over the chair how we would empower producers more. And at the end of it, when I was the chair, we actually made the producers half owners of the whole global system of fair trade. So it's something in the order of $12 billion a year in retail sales trade. It's a very significant global system. And the producers are half of the global board, they're half of the General Assembly, and every decision we take in fair trade is not just good for the farmers, it's actually made by those farmers and those producers. This just gives you a sense of some of the standards across people, planet, and prosperity. That's easy enough to have a look at later. The other thing I would say is that for companies that are, and there are 193 countries and many thousands of companies around the world trying, and we hope that this will help align the world on the outcomes we're seeking, the Sustainable Development Goals, it's really easy in fair trade to map everything that a company does or a city council does or anyone else does against the goals, because everything we do is tracked in a measurable way. And I'll whip through a series of kind of details about that, but I'm not going to go into the detail because we've had other opportunities to talk about these things. But zero hunger is one of the pivotal things that Fairtrade is addressing globally in these structures. Gender equality is absolutely fundamental. The decent work and economic growth principle is pivotal. Obviously, responsible consumption and production, which is what we're talking about today, is what I believe, and I'll say this unapologetically, I actually believe that what Fairtrade has created on the planet is the only thing I'm aware of that is systematically and to scale demonstrated that it is possible to have an alternative structure that actually creates a more sustainable world and inclusive growth instead of the non-sustainable growth economic model that we've been using all these years. And it's the only thing I've seen that is actually at scale and cuts across all of those sustainability goals. Climate action obviously is pivotal, and Fairtrade is responsible for the Pacific, for all of our producers in the Pacific who are the first that are already being affected. Tuvalu, I think, is already looking at where they're going to move their nation, island, state. And finally, peace, justice, and strong institutions. The governance piece is the pivot around that. And partnerships, which of course we all know and we're talking about today. And I would say, again, relevant to fair trade, doesn't buy or sell anything. Everything we do depends on partnerships. Everything we do is a company agreeing to spend more money in their supply chain to protect against modern slavery or to adhere to all of these standards. We work with communities, schools, and universities. Everything we do is about partnerships. We have created a mechanism, I think of it as a sandbox, where there's a different set of rules, and it is an amazingly effective way of transforming this global structure of trade. And I guess I can say that if everything we did and traded in the world today was by these standards and in this way, we would be an infinitely more sustainable planet. And it's a dream of mine that the World Trade Organization, who hasn't quite been able to achieve the goal of a level playing field even, will one day adopt all of these structures that Fairtrade has devised and proven are working around the world, and will actually make the whole world sustainable. Last thing I wanted to say is that modern slavery is really extraordinary. 300 years ago, the Quakers were working on trying to prevent slavery and stop it in the UK and the US, and we have now more modern slavery than we've had ever in the world, and it's around 150 billion in profits, 68% of which are in the Asia Pacific region. And it's fantastic that the whole world, like with plastics, is really starting to understand the problems in these supply chains. What are the solutions is the question I would ask. And the system that Fairtrade provides, and it's not just a label, I can tell you, the structures are really the only thing out there that is so transparent you can actually identify it. And we do find child labor in cocoa plantations, and producer organizations are suspended and they are removed from the system. It is a world out there where it is a don't ask, don't tell economy. Anybody can push things down to their second or third tier supplier and do anything they like and sort of have a plausible deniability. And it's really important that we find the structures like Fairtrade that are actually going to help transform this thing piece by piece. This just gives you a global picture of Fairtrade. It's actually up to 75 countries now. I've mentioned some of these statistics. It's about 200 million in premium funds. And you can see that Fairtrade has covered the vast majority of the markets of the world. There's still large chunks of Africa that we need to work on. And China is absolutely a problem for us, because one of our very fundamental standards is adherence to ILO principles, and China just does not recognize ILO principles at all. And so we have a real problem working with companies and supply chains that are going through China.
Thank you so much, Molly. Thank you very much. Molly Harris-Olson joining us from Melbourne. And look, I know it's very 2020 to have a problem sharing slides, but look at the positive side. I think of it, we're talking to people in Melbourne and Sydney and around Australia, and think of the carbon footprint we've reduced by actually doing it like this. I love that part of it. So I'm willing to put up with the occasional sharing slide problem for that.
From Kathmandu now for the first time in decades, because we're not flying. It's fantastic. It's
great. It is. All right. Thank you so much, Molly. We'll be coming back to you soon for the questions. As a reminder, you can put in your questions on the program you're dealing with now. But I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Anne Gabriel, the Program Director at MSC. Anne has over 25 years experience in international roles working across sustainable commodities, environmental, social and animal welfare initiatives. Her former roles include Head of Communications of RSPCA Australia, Global Communications Director of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, and Managing Director of Weber Shandwick Worldwide. So please welcome here in the room with us, Anne Gabriel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just glad the slide worked. Thank you to the organizers, GECA, for inviting the Marine Stewardship Council to participate in today's talk for World Ecolabel Day. It means we did okay last year, so we got invited again, so thank you. It actually feels really good to be with what I think is the largest group of people I've been with since March this year, actually. And obviously together with all those that are logged in as well, and I hope everyone's keeping safe. Certainly, it's no coincidence that this session is called Collaborative Impact. In my experience with international multi-stakeholder initiatives over the past decade, it's very clear that unless we mobilize collective enterprises across institutions, disciplines, and geographies, we will not be able to see the impact that we want to see in terms of addressing the global urgency of the dilemma we are confronted with. Some of these dilemmas are obvious, includes climate change, overpopulation, and overexploited earth, oceans, pollution, food and water security, poverty, marginalized communities, rising epidemics, the pandemic, and the list goes on. None of these, as we know, are isolated issues. They're all interconnected more than what initially meets the eye. The ocean, on the other hand, is not something that just pleases our eyes and hearts. The Earth's surface, about 70% of that comprises ocean, which is spectacularly the same as the composition of our human body. As David Attenborough says, every mouthful of food comes from nature, every lungful of air comes from nature. Without her, we cannot live. Billions of people around the world as well depend on fish as their main source of animal protein. It is the most traded commodity in the world, more than meat, rice, and sugar. As the main source of income, it also provides many communities around the world, millions of them really, to lead a decent life just with sustenance. However, with increasing population, we've seen some staggering numbers, haven't we? We've seen 9.7 billion by 2050, combined with the effects of climate change, global warming in our waters. We're up against some significant challenges. Just in the past 3 decades, we have seen fish consumption increase by 122%, fish production by 14%. And we've seen some staggering numbers there as well, as you can see in the slide on aquaculture production. A lot of that is obviously in terms of addressing food security issues. We've also seen some recent numbers by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization in the latest Sophia report, showing over 34% of fish stocks around the world being overfished, with about 78.7% of them landings coming from biologically sustainable stocks. These issues certainly attest to the role that the Marine Stewardship Council aspires to play as a mechanism for change. Founded 22 years ago, the MSC is an international, not-for-profit, science-based organization aspiring to end overfishing. The MSC is the only wild capture fisheries certification eco-labeling program that meets best practice requirements set by both the United Nations FAO and ISIL. It's a collective endeavor by multi-stakeholders with diverse interests and mandates. Over 20 years on, this bold innovation is no longer just a theory of change. It's a proven concept of change, emerging as a global sustainable seafood movement. It's a market-based mechanism that enables seafood producers to demonstrate their sustainability credentials through a certification scheme. It allows market players to adopt and choose the labeling program, so it continuously recognizes and rewards good practice amongst the fisheries. So this model motivates collaborative impact, allowing various pieces of puzzle to come together to ensure oceans continue to thrive. The MSC is also strategically leveraged and positioned and aligned with meeting the targets of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, specifically SDG 14, which is about life below water. We know the recent tracking for the SDG goals in terms of its ambitions hasn't been really all that optimistic. But in the research that was done and presented at the 8th World Sustainability Forum, it was really enlightening to see that the MSC program is driving some of these positive changes, with some of the fisheries coming on board the fisheries standard and delivering across more than 34 of the SDG targets. It's really encouraging to see. Today, the MSC standards is involved in 36 countries and engaged with over 17% of global marine wild catch, with significant progress being shown not just in the certification space, but those working towards a high bar in sustainability, representing more than a quarter of the global marine wild catch. Most importantly, we are seeing that a credible market-based program can and is driving real change on the water. By the end of last year, for example, the MSC reported over 1,700 improvements made on the water by certified fisheries, from ecosystems to habitats benefits, to improvements in the area of bycatch and interactions with ETP, improvements in fishery management, governance and policy, as well as improvements in healthy fish populations and harvest strategies. In a recent research by the MSC and CSIRO based in Tasmania, supported by the Western Australian Fishing Industry Council, and the material was published in PLAS One, it was interesting to see that the motivators and benefits of certification was beyond environmental and economic reasons. It showed that the MSC is playing a a significant role and a more meaningful one in forging and establishing good social relationships in terms of social license for operate and also in terms of enhancing its reputation. 10 years ago, we only saw 1,000 products labeled with the MSC around the world. Today, there are over 18,000 products using the MSC Ecolabel across 100 countries, covering more than 108 certified species, with an estimated $10 billion spent by consumers in MSC label products. The market reception to MSC Ecolabel is highly imperative. As we understand more about sustainable fishing, as we demand more for sustainable seafood, fisheries are also changing for the better. They are recovering fish stocks, reducing impacts, and putting better management in place. These fisheries need to be commended, need to be supported. Positive change means healthy oceans. This is an interesting, in 2017, there was a study done about what is the top of mind threats in consumers' minds. As you can see, terrorism is way up there, corruption, poverty, conflict, civil or external, and environment was number 5. Moving forward, we see now that environmental issues dominate the top of mind in terms of the biggest concern in people's mind. And even if you go onto some of the other factors, they're all indirectly related to the environmental factors. Well, and terrorism has gone down. I'm sure if we did research of this by the end of this year, pandemic would be right up there together with the environmental issue and terrorism as well. So no doubt much of this level of awareness is created by sustainability movements amongst the likes of Generation Z icons like Greta Thunberg, who care fervently and worry about the future they're inheriting. Young people all around the world are using social media platforms, speaking loudly about the actions we should take to save our oceans. Across mainstream media and digital platforms, we see a proliferation of information efforts around ocean activism. Hundreds of David Attenborough's immaculately presented documentaries to activism against ghost gear, pollution, and plastics. Not one day goes away with any of this being seen either in social media, in printed magazines and newspapers, or a conversation in a coffee shop with our family members or friends. But not all is doom and gloom. In Australia, we have seen substantial commitments from state and federal governments together with the fishing industry who have the foresight to leverage the independent and rigor of third-party certification schemes like MSC. The first MSC certified fishery in the world was from Western Australia, the Western Rock lobster, and since then we've had many first. Today, close to half of the wild-caught fish in volume in Australia is MSC certified, significantly above the global average of 17%. That indeed is something to be proud of. The MSC has made positive progress, particularly in the global north. In the US, the number of overexploited stocks is at a record low. In the Northeast Atlantic, it's dropped from over 70% in the early 2000s to about 40% today. Similar improvements and commitments are being made in Australia, New Zealand. We've also seen many countries in Asia come forward and engage positively with our program. However, the MSC understands that to meet our vision, the work we do in the global south is highly critical. These fisheries support the lives and livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people and supply most of our seafood on our plates anyway. It is highly critical for us to do more to build capacity and facilitate their transition to its sustainability. The MSC standard remains focused on environmental performance, sustainability, and traceability of wild capture seafood. However, we do recognize that there are widespread concerns regarding social issues in the seafood sector. As a result of that, we have taken steps to ensure that there are considerations around forced and child labor in our chain of custody standard and a mandatory disclosure from fisheries. This requirement will certainly provide seafood buyers and consumers a lot more assurance about the seafood that they're buying. The MSC has also launched the Ocean Stewardship Fund back in 2018. And this year, part of this fund, we had granted over £650,000 to fisheries and research projects working to protect oceans and safeguard seafood. This year, we had a focus on reducing impacts on threatened species, as well as tackling abandoned fishing gear, popularly known as the ghost gear. On the subject for collaborative impacts, while we definitely would like to see more momentum, we'd like to see more players come on board for obviously to answer the urgency of the quest that we have ahead of us, we wouldn't have come this far without the collaboration for so many organizations around the world. Together, they've enabled the MSC Ecolabel to be one of the most recognized labels for sustainable seafood around the world. In a research commissioned recently by Globescan, we're seeing consumers as well tell us that they want to have the right information in terms of when they go shopping, what should they be looking for? What does sustainable mean? You know, what kind of eco-label should they be looking for? So a lot of these are available in the consumer insights that I'm breezing through now because I'm running out of time. But we've got a lot, in a nutshell, consumers are saying they want to play a part in making the right choice to protect our oceans. They're also saying in terms of trust, they trust institutions like scientists, academia, and NGOs more than any other organization because there's a whole inundation of information out there and they want a lot of this information to come from trusted sources. So there's a role, as the minister had said a while ago, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just leverage the mechanisms out there, the international schemes that are already showing positive impact out there. It's just a matter of leveraging and supporting them. It's also a great pleasure for the Marine Stewardship Council to be part of the Trusted Labels group. I think Damian from FSC had taken you through some of the generic concept behind the Trusted Labels group. And we find that it's going to be simplifying the message for consumers to go to a supermarket, to go to a restaurant, and have to ask themselves 100 questions before they decide on buying a product. So the Trusted Labels group certainly has an imperative role to play in terms of just simplifying the message and the reference for consumers around the world. So thank you very much to GECA and for all of you for tuning in. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have today or post the panel session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. I must say, it's good to see a label like MSC that's at least answering the question of sustainability. Having recently trying to figure out the carbon footprint of fish, I tell you what, that's one of the most difficult things ever. So I'm glad somebody else is dealing with the hard questions there. I'd now like to introduce Michelle Thomas, the acting CEO of GECA. Michelle joined the GECA team over a year ago. She brings to the role her passion for creating solutions and offering pathways for business to choose a more sustainable future for people and planet. She's got experience in fundraising, marketing and sales, and a wealth of business experience that she now uses to drive positive changes across the supply chains. Please welcome Michelle Thomas.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks all. And apologies for the earlier technical glitches. I am super glad that I am not at home doing this and having to deal with those glitches, but I do miss my talking partner, my dog, who tends to talk just at those times when you're about to say go. So I get a bit of an opportunity now to give you a little bit more information about GECA and how we fit into that circular economy solution. So it's about collaborative impact, as we've highlighted a lot today. Who is GECA? GECA is a purpose-driven, not-for-profit. We stand for integrity, independence, and impact. We offer type 1 eco-labelling, we offer type 2 claims authentication, and type 3 environmental product declarations and life cycle analysis, which I'll go into a bit more depth later. We also offer consulting and advisory, which is for companies that are wanting to support or better their sustainable practices. We develop rigorous standards that are supported through industry specialists. And we also have our sustainable products database, which is our online database, which showcases our marvelous GECA licensees. So what is the value of a circular economy? I think too often it is considered a waste reduction strategy. It's not a waste reduction strategy only. It impacts the entire structure from design, manufacture, through to use and a broader environmental and social issues. Circular economy is really based on 3 principles. It's to design out waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use, and to regenerate natural systems. The benefits are improving air quality, better water, reduce water contamination, protect biodiversity, minimize greenhouse gases, and so on. At GECA, we truly believe our vision is a collaborative piece. It's not about one person, it's not about one organization. Circular economy, to move towards a more circular economy piece, it will only work if we all work together. Working together is crucial. The power of the partnership solves problems that no single partner can address alone. It works on those multiple pressure points. It improves information asymmetry. It builds new market opportunities, as well as combining the private sectors, governments, and not-for-profits for efficient outcomes. So as we've spoken about today is World Ecolabel Day, and as Craig mentioned, we have 50 countries globally celebrating a World Ecolabel Day. GECA is also a super proud member of GEN, which is the Global Ecolabelling Network, which is 27 international ecolabel organisations. So it's about that collaboration piece. As a member, we're able to foster cooperation, exchange information, harmonise standards, participate in events to promote eco-labels, and encourage supply and demand for a more environmentally preferable goods and services options. And great when I change slides around, but forget to tell the organisers that I've changed those slides around. So I do apologise there. So how does GECA fit into the piece? We have a suite of services that are designed for anyone that's committed to a continuous improvement in sustainability. We start with the LCA and the EPD. Your life cycle assessment is a tool used to evaluate the environmental impacts of a product or a service, from the extraction of raw materials, transportation to end of life. And with the LC data, the information that you get, you can create the EPD, Environmental Product Declaration, sorry for all the acronyms, that can then be used to evaluate the impacts and benchmark against similar products and help businesses drive improvement. We have the GECA claims authentication, which are self-declared claims, also known as type 2 labels. They're more specific. They allow consumers to confidently identify environmental benefits of a product or a service. It's not quite as comprehensive as your type 1 eco labels, as it doesn't evaluate the whole life cycle, although factors are taken into account. The claims are to show credibility. A verification of a claim shows that credibility, and GECA will create specific criteria that are relative to that specific claim. For example, recycled content claims. You then have your type 1 eco label, which is multi-level, multi-criteria, set criteria that show leadership in sustainable practices and processes. It communicates environmentally preferable products to consumers. The type 1 and circular economy, type 1 eco labels and circular economy, as I said, they test the products and services on multiple criteria. We have our standards assessed by independent third parties, and it looks at the entire life cycle from raw materials to the end of life. The GECA licensees that go through GECA certification must meet a wide range of criteria that consider environmental, human health, social impact, and ensure that they're also fit for purpose. If a product or service is certified by GECA, our licensees can use this eco label, this label here, and our rigorous assessment and robust standards mean that GECA certification is trusted and relevant to specific industries. Our stringent standards follow the ISO 14024 principles and the ISIL framework for global best practice, and again removes consumer doubt and confusion. All of our standards align with the United Nations SDGs, primarily the SDG 12, which is responsible consumption and production. A little bit more here about GECA's specific labels. We have our recycled product standard, which obviously buying products that are made of recycled content will help shift from that linear to a more circular economy. According to research by Planet Arc, 70% of Australians would be more likely to purchase a product that's made of recycled content. Our recycled product standard specifies minimum quantities of recycled materials by weight, but it also restricts further treatments so to ensure that further recycling can still be done. We have 2 licensees currently certified under our recycled product standard, and we have products ranging from postage satchels to porous paving blocks, a nice tongue twister there, made from damaged bins. Our waste collection service Waste generation in Australia has increased significantly, and it impacts severely on health, local and global environments and economy. With key stakeholders, we realised that there was really a need for a standard, for a waste collection service standard. And the standard sets sustainability benchmarks for services that are collecting waste from the point of collation or collection to the lawful processing or disposal facility. We wanted to improve the accuracy and transparency of waste collection data and have had a huge success with this standard, with the Better Building Partnerships members, including GECA certification in their contract renegotiations. We currently have 3 licensees certified under the standard and 2 more undergoing certification. All GECA's eco-labels, all GECA's Type 1 eco-labels do have a circular economy support mechanism in them. We look at the end-of-life criteria specifically. Products that are GECA certified need to be easily recyclable in Australia, have replaceable parts where possible. They're designed for separability and disassembly, and product stewardship services should be offered. I did have another slide, but it seems to have disappeared. But I did also want to say today, and through previous collaborations that we've had, I'm joined by a fantastic group of like-minded organisations with a common goal. We want to share our views, we want to share our advice and guidance and recommendations and provide clarity on our roles as third-party certification schemes. So how can you as an individual help? Take responsibility for what you purchase. Be an ambassador for change, as an individual or as an organisation. Demand products with recycled content. Demand product stewardships when you're purchasing products. Look for products with more recycled content. Organise clothes swaps with your friends. Look at ways that you can reuse products rather than that usual normal throwing away. That's it. Thank you from me. My contact details are on here. Thank you for your time today. If you have any ideas or want to share any information with me, please feel free to get in contact with me there. But thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michelle. We're going to move on to Q&A to start off. Hopefully we've got our people in Melbourne back on as well. Can I actually start, because it's been mentioned there, but I need a little. What is the Trusted Labels Group? How's it going to operate? Like, how am I going to interact with the Trusted Labels Group? How am I going to know more about it? Michelle, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, we're very early on in the piece. It's basically, as I said, we're trying to come together to define our roles in this space. We do all work together, and there will be a lot more information coming out about it soon. We've got some information that we'll be sharing over the next sort of couple of months. It's been in the process of getting it together for the last, I think, over a year now. Very busy organisations, and we just want to be
Is the intention to promote each other, so that, you know, somebody might know MSC, may not know GECA, for instance? Is it to try and increase people's understanding of those labels that are all at that high standard? Is that what it's aimed to do?
Partly, definitely. I think just to step back, so the Trusted Label Group comprises the Forest Stewardship Council, the Agriculture Stewardship Council, Marine Stewardship Council, Fairtrade, the Australian Organics, and GECA. And I think over time we've realized that so much of what we're doing, whether it's consumer fronting or stakeholder fronting, whether it's the government or the business sector, so much of that is being done in silos individually in terms of the commodities we respectively manage. And then I think in conversations that we were proceeding with, we realized how much more better we harness some of this energy that we have, that we're doing individually, to come collectively as a group, whether it's consumer education, whether it's harmonizing our interests with the government stakeholders, or whether it's trying to get businesses on board. There's so much power and impact that we can do collectively together rather than individually. So that was the idea of how these organizations are coming together. We thought we'll use, obviously, World Ecolabel Day as the day to launch and introduce our group. We've got some fantastic ideas in terms of how we want to bring this concept to life, and we hope to share that with you, certainly in the near future.
Excellent. I've got a question that came in earlier. How can business and government best support and drive the uptake of your label? I might come to you first on this one, Damian, and I'll come to you, Molly, as well. How can we drive these labels being taken up more? You know, obviously there tends to be an approach in Australia to never have anything mandatory. So how do we drive more take up?
Look, it's a good question. It's one we grapple with all the time, and I think part of our challenge is how do we differentiate ourselves from other schemes. In talking to government in our space has a policy of partisanship. So there are two schemes. One scheme's an industry scheme, and one is obviously our scheme. From our perspective, we think we need to differentiate ourselves better so that government can actually look at what it is that our scheme offers and what it is that it protects. And then we would hope that government, like consumers, then exercises choice, and it has an impact on their procurement policies, and they start sourcing responsible products from the labels that are meeting or setting the higher standards. And consumers are already doing that. We're seeing that already, and we're seeing purchasing and supply chain behaviours now from large organisations making decisions to support FSC because consumers are demanding it because they see the brand as providing a trust around the certification process.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because trust is, I think, the central question in all of this. How do you maintain the trust and communicate that to people? And I guess part of that is if there are these alternative industry-based brands, does that going to undermine trust of certification, for instance? Molly, how do you think we need to drive more people to use this and uptake the use of your label? And how do you distinguish from other labels that may be similar but not as great?
Thanks, Greg. Look, it's a really significant problem, and it is one that the Trusted Label Group is trying to address because there is so much noise out there, as was said. And I guess the thing that's fascinating to me is that, you know, when the President's Council was starting in 1992, we had no principles. Nobody was trying to be sustainable. Nobody even knew what it meant. We now have a situation where you won't find a global corporation or anyone that will say, oh, no, we don't want to be sustainable. Everybody says they want to be sustainable. And the number of companies that are actually acting in that way in a comprehensive supply chain approach to that is you know, a tiny percentage. So while people want to bask in the glow of being good, almost nobody wants to pay for it, and almost nobody wants to go to the hard yards to really even understand what do their supply chains look like. You know, we don't have modern slavery hiding in there because everybody's looking carefully. We have it in there because nobody's looking at it and everybody's trying to push it away and out of sight. So I guess, how do we get people? My hope is that we can, with this group, help to educate people on what to look for and why you can trust certain things. And of course, if it's a company that's certifying itself, or if it's an industry-based group company, like the comparison between FSC and the Australian Forestry Standard is just huge. They're not the same thing. And yet an unaware person, or if you don't know the details, then it seems like, oh yeah, that should be fine. Well, it's not. And I can tell you, sitting on the Green Building Council board years ago, you know, they're totally different. That's true of so many things. So there's now every major global chocolate company has their own certification scheme. Would we trust our kids to be able to, you know, mark their own homework? I don't think so. You know, anything that is self-certified might be a nice initiative, and the company might want to do good things, but actually it's not going to ever give you the trust that something that is independently certified and transparent in its outcomes and its standards is going to give you. So, I mean, there's a couple of things there that I think are important. The education piece is around helping consumers know what's the difference, and that means you know, being able to see the difference between things like self-certification and an independent process.
Thank you. We have a question for Anne. What percentage of a country's shoreline should be set aside as marine sanctuary to ensure sustainable breeding grounds and fish stock levels?
That's a really good question. It's a big question, a big topic, obviously, and it certainly differs in terms of which ocean jurisdictions we're talking about. So a little bit more complex to respond to. But what the Marine Stewardship Council tries to put forward and promote is, apart from just setting aside marine parks as sanctuaries, it's just ensuring that at the same time, while we're trying to address the economic benefits of livelihoods that depend on this, communities that depend on fishing as a source of income, that we continue to allow for fishing to happen, but just ensure that it's being run in a sustainable way, whether that's looking into healthy fish stocks, or whether that's looking at the impact on the general ecosystem environment, or that's looking into the management putting in place a robust standard. So that's indirect way of answering the question.
No, that's right. Look, I understand the complexity. In a sense, that's what the consumers and the public are looking for. We understand. Every time you look into any of these questions, it becomes ridiculously complex. We want somebody else to do all the hard work and then give us a label, so it makes it easier for us. That's what we're asking for. Yeah, simplify it. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for questions at this point. We're going to have a short break. Unfortunately, we're not going to provide you with food and coffee. You're going to have to make it for yourself. You're in your own home. So please take a brief break. We'll be back in about 5 minutes or so. If you're sitting there at your computer, apparently they're going to be playing some footage from the ABC's Your Planet series, including Fight for Planet A. I didn't ask for this, okay? I hate that guy. We'll be back with our next panelist from the Business and Government Driving Innovation panel in about 5 minutes. So thank you so much to all of our guests for the first panel. Thank you for coming along. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.